that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their cities were made of crystal that floated above giant planets. Their technology was so advanced that other species could only dream of understanding it. Their society ran like a perfect machine, with every decision based on cold logic and mathematical calculations. They believed they had created the most perfect civilization in the galaxy. Humans had arrived 60 years ago as refugees. Earth was dying, poisoned by war and pollution, and the last human ships had begged for a place to live. They, in what they considered an act of great kindness, allowed these strange creatures to settle on the worst worlds in their territory. The mining colonies that nobody wanted, the farming planets with difficult soil, the space stations that were old and needed constant repair. The humans took what they were given and said thank you. They worked hard. They fixed things. They made friends with other species. They had children and built communities and somehow managed to be happy even in the most difficult places. High Chancellor watched the reports about humans with growing worry. He was the leader of a tall being made of living crystal that shifted colors with his emotions. Right now, his crystals were dark blue, which meant he was troubled. The numbers did not make sense to him. Human population was growing faster than any prediction. Their crude technologies, built from spare parts and creative thinking, were solving problems that engineers had given up on. Worst of all, other species seemed to genuinely like them. They invited humans to their festivals. They traded stories with human merchants. Even the proud had started learning human games. This was chaos. This was disorder. This was everything that had spent 12,000 years eliminating from their perfect society. Called a meeting of the Crystalline Council, the 12 most powerful in the Dominion. They gathered in the Chamber of Logic, a room designed to remove all emotion from decision-making. Pure white walls, perfect silence, mathematical formulas carved into every surface. The humans are a contamination, announced. His voice was calm because voices were always calm. They spread disorder wherever they go. They make other species unpredictable. They introduce variables we cannot calculate. The council members flickered with agreement. Their crystals turned the same dark blue as their leader. "What do you propose?" asked Counselor Thresh, the oldest among them. "Resolution 7 Omega," replied. "Complete removal of all humans from space. They will be given 30 standard days to evacuate. Any who remain will be forcibly relocated." The vote was unanimous. Not one voice spoke against it. Ambassador Wei received the news in her small office on Prime. She was 73 years old, with silver hair and a face full of wrinkles that told the story of a difficult life. She had spent 40 years building connections between humans and other species. 40 years of patience, of careful words, of trying to prove that humans deserved respect. She read the decree 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she requested a meeting with Chancellor. He agreed to see her, though he considered it a waste of time. The decision was made. There was nothing to discuss. Wei walked into his office with her back straight and her face showing nothing. She had learned long ago that respected those who controlled their emotions. "Chancellor," she said, bowing slightly, "I have received the Council's decision." "Then you understand that this is not personal," replied. "Your species has done nothing wrong by your own standards, but your presence destabilizes our systems. Your chaos infects our order. This is simply mathematics." Wei nodded slowly. "We will go. Humans have been forced from their homes before. We know how to survive." Felt something strange at her words. Not guilt, because did not feel guilt, but something uncomfortable that he quickly pushed aside. "You have 30 days, he reminded her. "We will need only 20, Wei said. She turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. "But Chancellor, may I offer one piece of advice?" Waved his hand in permission. "Keep records of everything humans currently do in your territory, every job we perform, every system we maintain, every small task that nobody thinks about. Make a complete list." She paused. "You may find it longer than you expect." Almost laughed, though did not laugh. "We have complete records of all official functions. Your people hold no positions of importance." Wei smiled, and there was something sad in her eyes. "That is exactly my point, Chancellor. The important things are rarely official." She left without another word. The evacuation began immediately. Human ships that had been scattered across space began gathering at designated departure points. Families packed their belongings. Workers said goodbye to colleagues they had known for decades. Children cried because they were leaving the only homes they had ever known. Other species watched with confusion and concern. A merchant named found his human business partner, a woman named Maria, packing up her shop. "Where will you go?" asked. His forearms hung limply at his sides, a sign of distress in his species. "Anywhere that will have us," Maria replied. She was trying to smile, but her eyes were wet. "Don't worry about us. Humans are good at starting over." "This is wrong," said quietly. Maria stopped packing and looked at her friend. "Maybe, but it's not your fight. Take care of yourself, okay? And remember what I taught you about reading market trends." On the 30th day, the last human transport prepared to leave. Wei stood at the viewport, watching the crystal cities of Prime grow smaller as her ship pulled away. "Ambassador," her assistant said, "the Chancellor has sent a message. He says to wish humanity well in their future endeavors." Wei did not respond for a long moment. Then she said, "Send a reply. Tell him thank you for his kind words, and tell him to watch the power grid in the Grand Archive. The third coupling in Section 7 has been failing for 50 years. We've been fixing it manually twice a day. I doubt anyone else knows." On the 31st day, the stars were empty of human ships. The celebrated, they had removed the chaos. Their perfect society was pure again. 6 hours later, the lights in the Grand Archive began to flicker. And that was only the beginning. The problems started small, so small that they almost did not notice them. On Prime, the Grand Archive was the most important building in the Dominion. It held the knowledge of 12,000 years. Every scientific discovery, every mathematical proof, every piece of art and history that they considered worth preserving. The building was kept at exactly the right temperature because crystals could crack if conditions changed even slightly. On the first day after the humans left, the temperature in the archive shifted by half a degree. The automated systems reported that everything was working perfectly, but the temperature kept changing, up and down, never staying stable. Engineers were sent to investigate. They checked every system, ran every diagnostic, and found nothing wrong. The machines were doing exactly what they were designed to do. What nobody knew was that the archive's climate system had a flaw. The original engineers had made a small mistake 8,000 years ago, and over time, the system had started to fail in ways that were too subtle for sensors to detect. For 60 years, a human maintenance team had been fixing this problem by hand. They came twice a day, every day, and made tiny adjustments that kept the temperature stable. Nobody had asked them to do this. It was not in their job description. They did it because they noticed the problem and they knew how to fix it, and because they cared about the archive even though they were not allowed to use most of its resources. They had never told anyone because nobody had ever asked. On the agricultural world of 4, the crops began to die. The farming systems were completely automated. Machines planted seeds, delivered water and nutrients, and harvested the food. They followed the exact specifications from surveys done 400 years ago. But soil changes over time. Weather patterns shift. New insects arrive and old ones disappear. The machines did not know this because they only followed their original programming. Human farmers had been making adjustments for 60 years. They watched the clouds and predicted rain. They talked to local workers and learned about the soil. They changed the nutrient mix a little bit each season based on what they observed with their own eyes and hands. One old farmer named Wei had kept handwritten notebooks about every field he worked. He recorded which crops grew best in which locations, which fertilizers worked and which did not, what the weather did each year, and how it affected the harvest. When the humans left, those notebooks were thrown away. They were not official documents. They were just the scribblings of an old man. Within 3 weeks, crop yields on 4 dropped by 40%. Within 2 months, 3 sectors were experiencing complete crop failure. The machines continued to report that all systems were operating normally. In the belt, mining operations collapsed almost immediately. Human miners had developed their own communication network over the decades. They shared information about new deposits, warned each other about dangerous tunnels, and coordinated their work through conversations and friendships. When someone found a problem, they told everyone else. When someone discovered a better way to do things, the knowledge spread through the community like water flowing downhill. The replacement workers did not talk to each other. They followed optimal protocols. Each worker did their assigned task and nothing else. 3 tunnels collapsed in the first week. 12 workers died. The warning signs had been clear to anyone who knew how to read them, but that knowledge existed only in the minds and informal notes of human miners who were now light years away. Chancellor called an emergency meeting of the council. "These are temporary setbacks," he said, though his crystals had turned a sickly gray color that none of them had ever seen before. "We are simply adjusting to the absence of human workers. Our systems will stabilize." But the problems kept growing. The Merchant Guild reported that trade routes were failing. Human navigators had known shortcuts and safe passages that were never recorded in official databases. They knew which routes were dangerous during certain stellar alignments, knowledge passed down through stories and warnings rather than mathematical calculations. 2 trade fleets were destroyed before anyone thought to check the old human shipping logs. By then, those logs had been deleted as unnecessary data. The Medical Consortium sent urgent reports about citizens experiencing psychological problems. This was almost unheard of in their species, were logical beings who did not suffer from emotional difficulties. But something had changed. Recovery rates in hospitals had dropped. Elderly were dying faster than ever before. Suicide rates had tripled. Investigators discovered the cause, though they did not understand it. Humans had worked in hospitals for 60 years. They were not doctors or nurses because they were not qualified. They were cleaners, assistants, companions. They sat with dying patients and held their hands. They told stories to distract people from pain. They remembered the names of patients' family members and asked about their lives. They brought small gifts and smiled and simply existed alongside those who were suffering. The had called this primitive and inefficient. Medical care was about fixing bodies, not providing emotional comfort. But somehow, patients who had received human companionship recovered better and lived longer. Without that presence, something important was missing. The worst news came from the diplomatic corps. The Accords were the peace treaties that kept 7 potentially hostile species from going to war. These treaties were complicated and fragile, built over centuries of careful negotiation. Human diplomats had served as intermediaries for decades. They were not the or most powerful negotiators, but they were trusted. They had no territory to protect, no ancient enemies to hate, no hidden agendas to pursue. They just wanted everyone to get along. Their sincere, sometimes clumsy efforts at peacemaking had worked where logic had failed. When the end disagreed, a human diplomat would invite them both to dinner, and somehow, over food and conversation, find a solution that satisfied everyone. Now the humans were gone, and the old hatreds were returning. Intelligence reports showed that they were mobilizing their fleet. They were doing the same. Two species that had been at peace for 300 years were suddenly preparing for war. Chancellor sat alone in his office, reading the reports. His crystals were almost black now, a color that meant extreme distress. He had thought the humans were simple creatures doing simple tasks. He had thought removing them would be like removing a small part from a large machine. He had been wrong. The humans had been everywhere, doing everything, connecting everything. They were not parts of the machine. They were the oil that kept it running smoothly, the glue that held it together, the warmth that made it more than just metal and circuits. And he had thrown them away. For the first time in his long life, understood that he had made a terrible mistake, but he did not know if it was too late to fix it. He began composing a message to Ambassador Wei, his hands trembling in a way that hands were not supposed to tremble. Chancellor refused to admit the truth to the public. Every official announcement said the same thing: temporary difficulties, minor adjustments, everything under control. But in his private chambers, surrounded by reports that grew worse every day, he could no longer lie to himself. The food shortages had spread to 7 worlds. Rationing had begun, though it was called optimized distribution, because they did not like to admit weakness. Citizens who had never known hunger were now eating smaller meals and pretending everything was fine. The power grid on Prime failed completely for 3 hours on the 42nd day after the human departure. 3 hours of darkness in a city that had not experienced a blackout in 8,000 years. When the lights came back on, something had changed in the way people looked at their leaders. The war between thee and they was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. Border skirmishes had already killed hundreds. Both sides were blaming each other, and both sides were right, and nobody was left who could make them see reason. Received a message from the ambassador. It was short and cold. We once trusted your dominion to maintain peace. We trusted the humans you employed to speak honestly. You removed them. You broke the balance. Whatever happens next is your responsibility. The sent a similar message, though with more anger and fewer polite words. Spent 3 days writing and rewriting his message to Ambassador Wei. He was not used to asking for help. He was not used to admitting mistakes. Every version he wrote sounded either too proud or too desperate. Finally, he sent something simple. Ambassador Wei, the situation in space has deteriorated beyond our ability to manage. I am requesting a meeting to discuss the possibility of human workers returning to our territory. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Chancellor. He expected to wait days for a reply. The humans had every reason to make him suffer. The response came in 1 hour. Chancellor, we know, we have been watching, we have been preparing, but I must be honest with you. We will not return as refugees this time. We will not return as guests who can be thrown away when they become inconvenient. If you want our help, you must understand what you are really asking for. You are not asking for workers. You are asking for partners. You are asking for neighbors. Think carefully about whether you are ready for that. When you have an answer, contact me again. Ambassador Wei. Read the message 7 times. His first reaction was anger. How dare these short-lived, chaotic creatures make demands? They had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They did not need partners. They did not need neighbors. They needed workers who followed orders. But as he sat with his anger, something else emerged. A small voice that sounded almost like his own, asking questions he had never considered. What did it mean to have neighbors? What did it mean to have partners? They had always been alone. They traded with other species but did not befriend them. They made treaties but did not build relationships. They existed alongside the galaxy without ever truly being part of it. Was that why their civilization, for all its perfection, felt so empty? Push these thoughts away. He was being foolish. He was being infected by human chaos even from a distance. But the reports kept coming. The Grand Archive's temperature system had failed completely. Priceless artifacts were being damaged by fluctuations that the machines could not prevent. Engineers worked around the clock but could not solve a problem they did not understand. A scientist named had been assigned to research the maintenance logs. He was young and curious, qualities that were not encouraged in society but could not be entirely suppressed. He found something interesting in the deleted files. Handwritten notes from human workers, recovered from backup systems. Notes about the archive's climate problems, explaining exactly what was wrong and how to fix it. The solution was simple, embarrassingly simple. A manual adjustment to a valve that the automated systems could not reach, performed twice daily by human hands. Reported his findings to his superiors. They did not want to hear it. "We cannot rely on manual labor," they said. "We must find a technological solution." But there was no technological solution. The original design was flawed, and fixing it would require rebuilding the entire system. That would take years and cost more than the Dominion could afford. Began to understand something that his leaders refused to accept. Sometimes the answer was not technology. Sometimes the answer was a person who cared enough to show up twice a day and turn a valve by hand. On the 65th day, the lights on Prime flickered again. This time, they did not come back on for 6 hours. In the darkness, Chancellor made his decision. He sent another message to Ambassador Wei. It was shorter than the first one. "Ambassador, I understand what you are asking. I do not know if I am ready, but I am willing to try. What are your terms?" Her response came quickly. "Come to the neutral station at point. Come alone. Bring nothing but your willingness to listen. We will talk." Had not traveled alone in 400 years. Leaders of the Dominion did not go anywhere without guards, advisors, and ceremonial attendants. But Wei had asked him to come alone, and if he wanted human help, he would have to play by human rules. He told his staff he was taking a meditation retreat. He took a small, unmarked ship and flew to point by himself. The journey took 3 days, 3 days of silence with nothing but his own thoughts for company. It was the longest time he had spent alone since he was a child. By the time he arrived, something had shifted inside him. He did not know what it was yet, but he felt different. Ambassador Wei was waiting for him in a small room with simple furniture. She looked older than he remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Please sit down, we have a lot to discuss." Sat, and for the first time in his very long life, he prepared to truly listen. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace, like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They came in ships that were ugly by any standard, patched together from spare parts, covered in rust and repairs, held together by determination and hope. Each ship had a name painted on its hull in bright colors: the Second Chance, the Never Give Up, the Rising Phoenix, the Uncle Ming's Lucky Star. These were not warships, they were not even proper transport vessels, they were home. Each ship carried not just crew but families. Children played in corridors while their parents worked. Old people sat in common rooms and told stories about Earth, a planet none of them had ever seen. Dogs and cats wandered freely because humans had refused to leave their pets behind when they fled space. Ambassador Wei stood on the bridge of the Earth Remembers, the largest ship in the fleet. She was watching the stars, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. During the months of exile, the humans had not been idle. They had known this day would come, not because they were arrogant, but because they understood something that did not. Complex systems need more than efficiency. They need care. Wei had organized something unprecedented. Every human who had worked in space had contributed to a massive database. They recorded every job they had done, every problem they had solved, every relationship they had built. They created training programs and instruction manuals and transition plans. Most importantly, they had reached out to every species that had alienated over the centuries. The end had been on the edge of war. Human diplomats had contacted both sides quietly, not as representatives of any government but as friends. They reminded the ambassador of the time a human trader had saved his daughter from a pirate's attack. They reminded the general of the human engineer who had taught him to play chess. These were small things, personal things, the kind of things that do not appear in official records. But they mattered. When the human fleet arrived, it was not alone. Ships flew alongside them. Vessels guarded their flanks. Even the proud had sent a small delegation. Chancellor watched the fleet approach from the observation deck of his palace. His conversation with Wei at Point had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. She had not yelled at him or made demands. She had simply told him stories. Stories about human workers who had given their lives to keep systems running. Stories about friendships formed across species lines. Stories about the small kindnesses that made civilization possible. "You see us as chaos," she had said. "But we are not chaos. We are connection. We fill the gaps that logic cannot see. We solve problems that machines cannot understand. We do this not because we are paid to, but because we care." "Why?" had asked. "Why do you care about civilizations that do not care about you?" Wei had smiled sadly. "Because that is who we are. We cannot help it. When we see something broken, we want to fix it. When we see someone suffering, we want to help. It is not logical. It is simply human." Now, watching the fleet arrive, understood what she meant. The restoration began immediately, but it was not an operation with human support. It was a true partnership. Human engineers worked alongside technicians, teaching them not just what to fix, but how to notice problems before they became disasters. Human mediators brought the end to the negotiating table, not with logical arguments, but with food and music and simple conversation. The young scientist was assigned to work with a human maintenance chief named, was 67 years old, with gray hair and hands twisted by arthritis. She had worked in the Grand Archive for 30 years before the expulsion. Followed her through the ancient corridors, watching as she touched walls and listened to the hum of machinery. Her methods made no sense to him. She did not use sensors or computers. She just felt things. "There," said, stopping at a junction that looked exactly like every other junction. "This coupling is about to fail." Checked his scanner. All readings are normal. Laughed. "Your readings are normal because your sensors don't know what to measure, but listen." She pressed her ear against the wall. "You hear that? That tiny vibration? That's metal fatigue. This coupling will fail within a week." "How can you possibly know that?" Shrugged. 40 years of experience. 40 years of getting things wrong and learning from my mistakes. 40 years of paying attention to the small things that don't show up on screens. She opened a panel and began making adjustments. Her movements were slow because of her arthritis, but precise. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Your people built all this to be perfect," said as she worked. "But nothing is perfect. Everything breaks, everything changes, everything needs someone to care about it." She looked at with kind eyes. "That is not a flaw in the universe. That is just how life works." Was quiet for a long time. Everything he had been taught said that methods were primitive and unreliable. But he could see with his own eyes that she was right and his sensors were wrong. "Can you teach me?" he asked finally. Smiled. "That is the first right question you have asked." Across space, similar scenes were playing out. Humans teaching to see what they had been blind to. Teaching humans the technical knowledge they had developed over. Both sides learning that they needed each other. The ambassador sat across from the general at a table filled with human food. They had been enemies for so long that neither remembered why. "This is strange," the ambassador said, eating something called pizza for the first time. "It is," the general agreed. He was drinking beer and trying to pretend he did not like it. "But I find that I do not want to kill you as much as I did last month." "I feel the same way," the ambassador admitted. Perhaps we have been fools. A human woman named Maria appeared at their table. She was the same merchant who had been friends with the named before the expulsion. More pizza? She asked cheerfully. Both the ambassador and the general nodded. Maria smiled and went to get more food. She was not a diplomat. She was not important. She was just a woman who liked to feed people and make them happy. But somehow, she was exactly what the galaxy needed. On Prime, the lights stayed on. The Grand Archive's temperature stabilized. The crops on 4 began to recover. The war between thee and the was officially cancelled. Instead, they announced a joint festival to celebrate their new friendship. Human musicians were invited to perform. Chancellor watched it all with wonder and something that felt almost like hope. I still do not understand, he told Ambassador Wei. How do you do this? How do you turn enemies into friends? Wei laughed. Honestly, we do not know either. We just try, we fail, we try again, we keep trying until something works. She patted his arm gently. That is the whole secret, Chancellor. There is no secret, just people trying to be good to each other. For the first time in his long life, felt something warm in his crystalline heart. He did not have a name for it yet, but later would teach him the human word. It was called love. 1 year had passed since the humans returned, and the galaxy was not the same. The Dominion no longer existed. In its place was something new, something that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. They called it the Orion Cooperative, and it was everything the old Dominion had tried to prevent. It was messy. Decisions took longer because everyone had a voice. Debates were loud and sometimes emotional. Plans changed when new information arrived. Nothing was perfectly optimized anymore. And somehow, impossibly, it worked better than anything that had come before. Chancellor had resigned his position on the day the cooperative was founded, but he had not left in shame. He had stood before the assembled representatives of a dozen species and said something no leader had ever said. I was wrong. 3 simple words that changed everything. For 12,000 years, we believed that perfection meant removing everything unpredictable. We built a civilization that ran like a machine, and we were proud of it. But machines do not grow. Machines do not adapt. Machines do not love. He paused, and his crystals shifted through colors that none of his people had names for. The humans taught us that imperfection is not weakness. It is strength. The ability to make mistakes and learn from them is more valuable than never making mistakes at all. The crowd was silent. Then slowly they began to applaud. Not just the humans, but and even the proud. Everyone who had felt alone in the galaxy, everyone who had been told they were too chaotic or too emotional or too different. They applauded because finally, someone had told the truth. Now worked as a cultural liaison, helping his people understand the strange new universe they had joined. He spent his days learning human languages, not because they were useful, but because he had discovered that some ideas could only be expressed in certain words. The word he practiced most was sorry. It did not exist in the language, and learning to say it, learning to mean it, was the hardest thing he had ever done. Ambassador Wei had refused any official position in the new government. She said she was too old for politics, though everyone knew she could have been elected leader of the entire cooperative if she wanted. Instead, she spent her days in a small garden on Prime, teaching young beings of all species how to grow tomatoes. Children stood beside youngsters, getting dirt on their hands and learning that food came from soil and sunlight and care. This is the most important diplomatic work I have ever done, Wei told visitors who asked why she chose gardening over governing. When you grow something together, you learn to trust each other. When you share a harvest, you become family. The young scientist had been promoted to lead a new department. They called it the Office of Noticing Things. Its job was simple but revolutionary. Find the gaps. Discover the problems nobody had thought to look for. Pay attention to the small kindnesses that made systems actually work. By standards, the department was hopelessly vague. There were no clear metrics, no mathematical formulas, no way to measure success. Made decisions based on feelings and hunches and conversations with people who knew things that did not appear in databases. It was the most popular department in the entire government. Young fought for the chance to work there. They wanted to learn the strange human skill of caring about things that could not be calculated. Still worked in the Grand Archive, though now she had 20 apprentices following her everywhere. She taught them to listen to machines, to feel the rhythm of systems, to notice when something was wrong before the sensors detected it. The machines will tell you what is happening, she told them, but you have to tell yourself what it means. The Enda had become unlikely allies. Their joint festival had been so successful that they made it an annual event. Every year, thousands of beings from across the galaxy gathered to eat food, play music, and celebrate the simple fact that they were not at war. The festival had a rule that everyone loved: no weapons, no uniforms, no titles. Everyone was equal, from the highest leader to the youngest child. They called it the Festival of Friends, and it had become the most important event in the galactic calendar. On the one-year anniversary of the human return, a memorial was unveiled in the center of the Grand Archive. It was not a statue or a plaque. It was a garden. Wild and overgrown, full of plants from 100 worlds, it broke every rule of design. It was not efficient. It was not optimized. It was alive and changing and beautiful in a way that perfect crystal could never be. At its center stood a simple stone with words carved in both human and script. The words said, "We are all we have. Let us act like it." Stood before the memorial with. His crystalline body had changed over the past year. Small imperfections had appeared, tiny cracks and color variations that others found disturbing. He found them beautiful. "I still do not fully understand," he admitted, "how you do what you do, how you create connection out of chaos, how you turn strangers into family." Looked at the garden, at the visitors from a dozen species who had come to see the memorial, at the children playing between the plants. "Honestly, we do not understand it either," she said. "We just try, we fail, we forgive each other for failing, we celebrate the trying." She smiled at him, and her wrinkled face was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "That is the whole secret. There is no secret, just people trying to be good to each other, one small kindness at a time." Thought about his people's history. 12,000 years of perfection. 12,000 years of isolation. 12,000 years of believing they were better because they were alone. The humans had shown them another way. Not a perfect way, but a living way. A way that grew and changed and made room for everyone. "I think," said slowly, "that I am finally beginning to understand." Patted his arm, an impossibly informal gesture that would have scandalized him a year ago. Now it just made him feel warm. "Good," she said, "that is how it starts." Above them, the sky was full of ships from every species in the cooperative. They came and went constantly, carrying not just cargo but hope. The galaxy was not healed. Perhaps it would never be fully healed. The scars of the past were too deep, the mistakes too many. But for the first time in a very long time, the beings who lived among the stars were trying. They were reaching out to each other, learning each other's languages, sharing each other's food, caring about each other's children. They were becoming, slowly and imperfectly, a family. And that, the humans knew, was always enough. In her garden on Prime, Wei looked up at the sky and smiled. She was 94 years old now, too old to travel between the stars, but not too old to plant tomatoes and teach children and hope for the future. A young girl approached her, holding a small pot with a seedling inside. "Ambassador Wei," the girl said shyly, "I grew this myself. Will you help me plant it in the memorial garden?" Wei took the girl's hand gently. "Of course I will, little one, but please just call me Wei. We are friends now, are we not? The girl's crystals flickered with joy. Yes, we are friends. Together, they walked to the garden to plant something new. And somewhere, across the vast distances of space, the ghost of Earth smiled down at its children. They had lost their home. They had lost almost everything. But they had not lost the thing that mattered most. They had not lost each other.